Cool. All right. I think I'm sure we will get more and more attendees over time, but just to be punctual, we kick it off.
Sounds
Saying
good.
sorry is very Canadian. It's true. All right, cool. Welcome everyone. This is our 6th Real Talk for those that haven't joined one yet. Very excited to kick this off again. We had a bit of a break with everything that's been going on. We have, I think, not hosted one for, I think, 6 weeks or so. So this is, it's been a mini break. But my name is Daria, and I'm one of the founders of Bunch. Bunch is a startup that used to be located in Berlin and New York. We still have team members on the East Coast of the US, but now we went fully remote. So I would say it's a startup that operates fully remote. And we are building tools for leaders since a few years, and especially excited to now be building an AI leadership coach, which is launching later this year, very soon actually, probably in the summer still. Currently in private beta, so if you're interested in taking a look at it, please head over to Bunch.ai and get early access. It's possible. And yeah, super excited to hear your feedback. But enough about us. So a little bit more about the format. The idea behind Real Talks is to help you as managers and as leaders to learn from people that have been there, that have seen difficult times, but also exciting times, and have real stories to share and real tips and tricks and hacks to share about how to build awesome teams and create great cultures and build awesome companies. So I'm really excited to welcome Renita today, who is not only a leader herself, but also is a coach to by now over 1,000 leaders in over 40 countries. Is that true?
That's right. That's right. Very international clientele.
That's amazing. Not only are you working with so many leaders from so many different countries, but you have a really interesting background yourself, being a Juilliard-trained pianist and having an MBA from INSEAD, and working as a mental trainer with future Navy SEALs and other special armed forces.
Exactly. Yeah.
People. Super cool. I can't wait to unpack so many stories today. So very warm welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. For everyone who's attending, even though you see us and hear us, but we only see you in the chat, don't be discouraged by this difference in voicing. We do want to hear your questions, and we want to hear your comments, and we want to make this a conversation and a discussion. So please feel free to either use the chat, some of you have already done, which is amazing, or use the Q&A function. Both works, whatever works best for you. We will be picking up questions from there and answering them, because in the end, it is about you and whatever you have on your plates right now. So our job with Renita is to make sure that you get a lot of insights, inspiration, but primarily also find answers to challenges you're currently facing. So don't shy away from dropping your questions and comments in the chat. Awesome. Cool. Let's kick it off. So I'm going to start. I have a few questions myself, obviously, very curious. So I'm going to start dropping them on your Renita, and then, yeah, please, everyone chime in. So as you already shared with us, you are an active executive coach and a high performance coach. What are the current challenges that leaders bring to you? So what are they getting your help on resolving?
So I would say there are 3 main buckets that I'll put the challenges in, and I'll tell you what they are, and then if you like, we can dive in a little bit deeper. So the first one is simply just staying focused on what's important. So having the discipline and the self-control to really focus on what's going to move the needle, and finding those productivity systems, basically being very systematic about being productive. So I would say that's one big bucket. The second one is dealing with all the emotional, ego-driven habits. So self-doubt, second-guessing, people-pleasing, feeling like you can't be your true self, really be your authentic self. So that's another big bucket. And then the third one, no surprise probably, is managing a team, leading a team, getting them to do what you want them to do, what you need them to do if you're going to reach your milestones. And so some of the sub challenges I see under that is when, as you're growing fast, bureaucracy starts to creep in. You know, at the beginning, you could move really fast. There was no paperwork. You could make decisions quickly. And then as you're starting to grow, now you've got the processes, the bureaucracy, that the red paper or the red tape that starts to come in. Second sub-challenge would be when there's a culture of blame starts to creep in, where people are afraid to make mistakes. And if there is a mistake, then they're really afraid to admit that they made the mistake, and they're always looking for someone else or trying to find someone else who, you know, it wasn't them, basically. And then another challenge I see a lot is this lack of ownership or accountability. So just this fear of getting it wrong is where I think it comes from. And so nobody really is stepping up to take full ownership of a solution or a problem. And then a final one would be just lack of clarity. So people don't know exactly what is most important. This ties back to the first challenge. And so they're not able to prioritize what they're working on. And so, you know, that kind of affects everything in the group, this lack of clarity about what should we really be working on.
Mm-hmm.
So
super, super interesting. Thank you for running them down. I think they're all, they're all very relatable, to be honest. I think I can definitely relate to all of them, I think.
Well, that would be the final point I made, is if you're feeling any of those things, just know that this is so normal, that everyone I speak to is having one or more of these challenges.
So interesting. So we all struggle with the same problems and same issues. However, still a few solutions. But you actually do have very practical advice. So maybe let's dive one by one. And the first one I would like to pick up is the productivity one. Maybe to unpack this a little bit, and maybe some of you can relate, whoever is listening and watching. We all have these great intentions, right? I have this like notebook here with me. Like my intent is always to sit down the first thing in the morning after I did like workouts and my morning habits, like to write down what are the most important things that need to happen that day and what are my top 3 priorities and kind of like my should haves and nice to haves. And it's still, and I get to do this most of the days, but not every day. And I keep questioning myself, like, I know it's important. I know it makes my day better. And still not every day I actually manage to do those things. What are your experiences, or what is your advice to kind of be consistent with the intention? And why do we keep losing that intention? Why can't we live up to it every day?
That is the question, isn't it? Yeah, I think it's helpful to know a little bit more about your brain here, or our brains. Like, our brains fundamentally do not want to think, because thinking takes up valuable resources. And so how often have you said, all right, I got to sit down and really plan out my day, and then you think, nah, I'll just start working. I already know basically what I need to do, right? So planning,
every second day.
planning takes a lot of energy. And so that's why your brain or your mind is subtly saying, well, no, we don't really need to plan. So for me, that was really helpful to understand that I was never going to feel like planning. It's always going to be something that there's going to be a little resistance to. And so I think once you know that, when you feel that urge to not plan, you can say, yeah, I know you just want to get going, but we're going to plan. And you just kind of talk to yourself, like, I don't know, you don't let your dog decide everything that you do, right? So in the same way, you don't want to let your mind kind of run the show. You tell the dog where we're going, and you train your dog. And in the same way, you can start to tip the balance, so that even if there is that little bit of resistance, you just have this motor memory where you're just like, no, we're going to sit down, or we're going to figure out what are the top 3 for today.
And is that the tactic or the hack that you would still recommend, kind of like the daily top 3, which I think is a very common one and own one? Is that the one to go to?
Yes. And there's a piece that goes with that, because so often people have a long list, 17 things, you know, and they just, why not add just one more thing? And then so now nothing has priority, and you're just, if something urgent comes in, now you have nothing to balance it against. You're just saying, all right, I'm going to do this thing. Whereas if you have a top 3, you can say, is this new thing coming in, is it actually more important than these top 3? And now you're making a very rational decision about whether to do that urgent thing now or not. As opposed to if you have a list of 17 things, it's like, well, yeah, I might as well just do it.
Yeah. I actually was thinking a very similar thought right now. Thank you, Michael, for bringing it up, because I was also trying to actually kind of linking. Michael is asking, what are the similarities between the type of advice you're giving both managers and Navy SEALs? And I would like to hear the answer to this, and also in particular to this topic of understanding what's important in the moment when things change constantly. What can we learn from kind of like the training programs you do with Navy SEALs? Like, they also are in situations many times, right, where priorities change suddenly. So how to get that kind of quick reprioritization, how to understand quickly what's most important right now and shuffle your top 3?
That's a great question. So what I recommend is people create a list of criteria. Just get out a Post-it note and write down what are those decision criteria for determining what's priority. So many people don't have this. And they're just going through the process every day trying to figure out what's high priority. Instead of, I mean, for the most part, you know what kinds of things you're going to have to be doing. So you can come up with a list of priorities, decision criteria in advance. Is it time sensitive? Is this revenue generating? Do I have all the information I need? Does this align with my values? Right? You come up with your own criteria. But now you're just going through a checklist every day to see, all right, what are the top 3 based on these criteria that I've decided? And so we can get more into the Navy SEALs later, but they have systems for everything. They're not making decisions on an ad hoc basis.
Interesting. It is very interesting, or very parallel to what I think you to the advice you get as a startup founder often, right? It's focus, 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 which basically means there's always this 15 things that you need to do well as a startup. You need to have a kick-ass product. You need to have an engaged user base. You want to actually make the impact, like realize your vision. You also need to make money. You also need to please stakeholders. And there's so many things. And I think a lot of founders struggle with that kind of decision of like, which one is more important first, and which can I kind of tackle next, and which can I tackle later. And I think that's the key kind of clarity on this. If that is missing, it's really hard on a day-to-day basis because things are getting thrown at you constantly. But speaking about the Navy SEALs, yes, what's the difference? What's the similarities of advice you give to managers? Where is this?
Well, if I can just add on to what you just said just a second ago. So sure. I think it takes, first of all, a mindset shift. And I struggle with this too, just being able to focus on one thing at a time. Because there's this, I've just noticed now, there's this constant undercurrent of, I gotta get it done, constantly thinking of all these things, like you just gave a nice list there of all the things that we're always thinking about we have to get done. And so we're never putting 100% of our focus on a thing. And you probably know this, but if you were able to put 100% of your focus on one thing at a time, you would get so much done. And you might find that some of those things that were on your list now are just getting done because you've answered questions through your deep focus on other things. And so this is really where, again, you need to understand yourself that you are never not going to feel like you can just relax and do one thing. This is going to be something that you really have to overcome that resistance and just make a decision. I am going to train myself to do one thing at a time.
Yeah, and I have so many follow-up questions, but I do think it's time to shed light on the SEALs versus managers situation. Okay. So how is the advice similar, and how is the advice different?
Oh, well, the advice probably wouldn't be any different. So the similarities they have is that, you know, they're working with constraints, whether it's time, whether it's lack of information, whether it's resources that they don't have. Whether it's they have some underperformers on their team. Even in the Navy SEALs, there are underperformers, which in many cases is someone who has a fixed mindset, somebody who's not able to accept that they're not good at something. And so they just want to do the things that they're good at. So they're dealing with the same kind of constraints. Really, any manager in the world. The specifics, the particulars might be different. They're out in Afghanistan, but the actual dynamics are the same. Now, what really makes the SEALs and the Special Forces different is, first of all, they focus on training. Training meaning lots of repetition of the habits that they want to develop. And this is something that business people don't do. They feel like they should be able to do something once and do it right and well the first time. And then they feel very discouraged and they doubt themselves when they can't. The SEALs, they don't have that attitude. They understand that you need to be training yourself. For Bin Laden, they trained for that mission hundreds of times, all these different permutations. And I don't see people in the business world doing the same thing and preparing for business meetings, for presentations, for pitches, for difficult conversations. I had one client who was going to be leading a very important meeting of 13 domain experts. And so she wanted to start off that project. She was kicking off a project. She wanted to kick it off as well as she could and make a great first impression from the very first moments. And so we practiced the first few moments of that meeting so that she wouldn't be tentative. She wouldn't be a people pleaser. She wouldn't be all the things that she might default to because that's what she's used to. And so I think this idea of training and practice would help people in the business world really ramp up their growth and their results much faster. So that would be a big lesson to learn from the Navy SEALs. And then the other one is that they are just relentlessly resourceful. They assume that there is a solution and they are going to find it. And they don't take time to figure out or to feel like, that didn't work. And feel bad. They're just like, okay, that didn't work. Now what? Oh, that didn't work. Now what? And so they develop, first of all, the ability to just rebound really quickly when things don't work. And then they're also really good at communicating the next plan of action, which is where I think sometimes in the business world, communication falls flat, where people are like, oh, I didn't know we were doing that. And it's like, oh, well, there was an email or there was a Slack or something. And so things are falling through the cracks because the change of plans, change of strategy is not being communicated clearly. And with the SEALs, they're trying to breach a target, right there, and they can hear on the other side of the door that the enemy is preparing, for battle. So they need to make sure that communication is crisp and clear and precise, because not doing that means, some dire results.
So a follow-up question on this, because I think many people can relate on this call as well. We've all been there. We think we communicated it. We've sent an email. We posted in our team channel, and we think people got it now. And then we still have one person, two people, three people in the team like, what? Oh, I didn't get this. I didn't get the memo. I don't know what's going on. Why are we doing this now? So how can we, what are specific, concrete things to keep in mind? What should we do in order to make our communication as leaders clearer, in particular this environment where it's mainly digital now, mainly online?
Yes. I think the first step is to really create context where you say, all right, things are going to be changing fast and we're going to have to be communicating clearly. And so first of all, your responsibility is to understand that environment, that there is going to be change. So you kind of just want to make people aware that this is not just might happen, it's probably going to happen, right? So that would be the first thing, just raising people's awareness and just their sense of, okay, I need to be alert. Things might be changing. Maybe I need to be proactive in checking in.
Exactly. I think this is actually a very good point. I think some people on our team, and I haven't been doing a good job in preparing them. So I haven't done the thing of I always just say things will be crazy, things change all the time. But I think a better way would have been to say things change very quickly. Therefore, it's always safe to check in the moment you like hit the virtual office. Like check in with whoever your direct collaborator is, whoever your manager is at that point or whatever, but like check in with them and say, did anything change? These are my priorities, right? This is what I'm doing. And I think people started picking that up, and those that actually do that do much better because they like get the information quicker since they're proactively checking it. So I think this is a very important point.
So that ties back into the earlier point of taking ownership and having clarity. It's hard to be motivated about doing something when you're not sure if you're doing the right thing. And so people are always in that state of, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but something else just came in and I'm not sure now, which thing am I supposed to be prioritizing? And so they can't put 100% of their focus on something. However, the other flip side of that for the leader is to make sure they're checking in also. So I think what I said is clear, but what did you hear me say? Because too often leaders are moving fast, right? They think they were clear. They think there couldn't possibly be any way that anyone misunderstood what I just said, right?
Exactly.
And almost inevitably, right? People aren't always listening 100% all the time. So just taking that time, and again, your brain isn't going to want to do this. Your brain is like, no, let's keep going. They got it. Let's keep going. And if you could just take those 30 seconds to check in and then have the patience if someone does have a question. So you can't just say everybody got that right and then you need to make it safe for people to actually say, actually, no, I don't understand exactly what you mean by X.
Yeah.
So that
yeah.
By being impatient when people actually do ask clarifying questions, you're basically saying, don't ask clarifying questions.
Yeah. I actually have a good pipeline of questions now. I would say let's try to address them. They're all related, actually. One is from, I have three. I will address all three of them. So Bill, Anthony, and Mario, stay tuned. We're going to cover them. So the first one fits a bit better right now, which I would do as a follow-up. And Bill is asking, there are more distractions than ever. Each is a shiny object. Is this COVID-19 work from home life we're leading? A whole new layer has popped up. What advice do you give to keep us focused? Very good question.
I mean, this is a work in progress. I struggle with this. Basically, I talk to myself is basically where I start. I say, all right, here's what we're doing now. And there's something about saying it out loud that makes it more intentional. So I guess that's the word, if you want to think about it. Make things intentional. So now I am going to do this. And sometimes I write it down on a piece of paper because I might get distracted while I'm surfing, looking for some information, and then forget what I was actually supposed to be doing. So I try to concretize the work that we do, which is so abstract, right? So I say it out loud, I write it down, and then I say, I set my timer, 30 minutes, this is what you're working on. And so I try to create as many boundaries for my attention as possible, using time as a tool instead of as a threat, right? Because you all had deadlines, and so time becomes this threat where I gotta go, I gotta do this, oh no, I gotta do that, right? And there's this sense of that you're just constantly like a chicken with their head cut off. And so using time as a tool helps your mind calm down. So now your mind can say, all right, for the next 30 minutes, this is what we're focused on. And it's just a constant game of bringing your attention back, because it is going to wander. There's lots of distractions. And, sometimes I try to make a game out of it. Just instead of beating myself up, making myself wrong for not being able to be focused, it's just like, all right, I got distracted. How quickly can I get back into the flow? All right, here we go, trying again. And it's just this constant, encouragement to stay focused. Because I know the reward when I do stay focused is I feel so good.
I think this is a good question or a good moment to address Mario's question, I actually believe. However, before we do that, just to wrap it up and be super actionable, what are your three tangible rituals to stay focused? So what do you do on a day-by-day basis to help yourself constrain and stay focused? What are your hacks?
Well, paper and pen. So I write things down by hand.
Yep.
I use time a lot. So Oh, I don't know if that's going to show up on the
Yeah,
screen.
yeah, it's a sand.
So, you know, I have a Pomodoro app, but I also like the very physical visual of sand. You know, that reminds me I don't have unlimited time. I'm
Interesting.
receiving time. So I want to make the most of it instead of just frittering it away, which is so easy to do. So that would be second. And then third, just making a decision.
Mm.
I want to live a life that feels focused. I don't want to live a life that feels distracted. And I guess that goes to one of my values. So just really affirming, because whatever you do now is what you're going to do no matter when you get what that thing is that you think will make you happy. When you get the funding, when you get the promotion, when you get the title, whatever it is, you're going to be doing the same distracted thing that you do now. And so we need to train ourselves to do what we want. We need to train ourselves now instead of
Yeah,
expecting something external to change that.
to change that. That's such a wise point. Thank you for that.
Not easy.
Um, no, I know it's really, but as you said, I think the mistake we mostly make in business environments is to think that something is going to work in the first place, like in the first round, and assuming we don't need 5 rounds of preparations. Just because we're not in war, people are not going to die, but like people are going to lose jobs. People are going to like, the company's going to die. Your customers will be not happy. So like there is actually stakes. Like
There
they're not
are.
maybe like war stakes, but close enough. And
Yeah.
I agree with your assessment of, especially leadership and management is entirely undertrained, I think, overall. However, back to Mario's question, where do you start on addressing a culture of blame? Is it more about systems or about people change or anything else? So when people don't take responsibility for actions but blame others, what do you advise executives to do? Do
What was the
you
first
advise
thing you
them?
said? Is it more about distance?
Is it more about systems or about
Oh.
people change? And I guess I'm interpreting a little bit in your question, Mario, but I guess the question is like, if you actually discover that's happening in your team and you
Mm.
have impact, what do you change? How do you change it?
Oh, yeah. You want to nip that in the bud as soon as possible because that will become very toxic. So you as the leader need to make it safe for people to make mistakes because by default, people are going to optimize for not making mistakes. That's just how we're wired biologically. Biologically, we don't want to make mistakes. So you as a leader need to step up and say, you know, here, look, I screwed up this. Here's what happened. Here's the decision I made to reach this outcome. And here's what I'm learning from it. And just really walk the talk, show them what making a mistake can look like. Um, it's basically owning everything. We're talking about extreme ownership. So you own your mistakes, you own your failures. And when you have a leader who does that, that just changes everything. So that would be the first thing, is to really role model it for people so
Mm,
that you step up and um, you don't try to downplay what happened. You say, all right, what I just said, right? Just really sharing that language where you're owning the mistake. So now when you say to people, it's safe to make mistakes, right? Fail fast, they believe you because you've shown them that that's what you're doing. The second thing I would do is you need to find a way to incentivize people to make mistakes. So I know a founder who has a weekly meeting where they just talk about the mistakes. That's how they're contributing to the company. And so you want to set up this idea that mistakes are actually intellectual property. You are providing value to the company by
by
saying,
making
here's the
mistakes.
mistake that happened. Here's what was the process that led up to it. And then here's what we're learning out of it. And for many tech companies, that's what helps them succeed. I was talking to the
Interesting.
CTO at Audible, and he said, you know, I used to feel bad when we made mistakes, but then I realized our competition was going to have to make the same mistakes too. And so we were just staying ahead of them in making those mistakes. So you really need to very consistently send this message that, and I'm not talking about careless mistakes, right? You
Mm,
want people to be focused on the details. So make it clear to them, these are the mistakes that we shouldn't be making. We should
Mm.
have systems around making sure we have the right data, that we are not letting things fall through the cracks. But the mistakes where you made a decision to try something, to test something, and it didn't work out, those are the mistakes that we want.
So a follow-up question on this, because I think we've talked about this in a previous conversation. You made a really good point about leaders actually don't really know how to admit mistakes. That's one of these things. We just never practice that.
No.
We just assume, I mean, going into the room and like picking some random situation and feeling guilty about it and sharing that with the team, that's like admitting a mistake. Do you have any, first of all, it would be interesting to hear your perspective on why that doesn't always work and why we actually fail at admitting mistakes as leaders. And that is also actually not helpful to our teams. And then what kind of the solution is. So how to actually do this right.
Yeah, I think that's a really important conversation, you know. So again, you want to understand your biology. Biologically, when you admit that you made a mistake or you didn't do something right, it sets up a survival reaction, a fight or flight reaction. Your body actually feels like there's danger. So just understand that. It's going to feel really uncomfortable. It will probably never feel comfortable to admit that you made a mistake. There's always going to be some physiological reaction. It'll get easier, but there is going to be something. So that's the first thing, is just understand that it's not ever going to feel comfortable. The second thing is to shift your mindset so that it's not about being embarrassed or ashamed or being needy. You know, a lot of people are looking for reassurance. I'm still smart, right? I'm still a good worker. They feel like they've lost worthiness somehow by making a mistake. They feel like someone's keeping score. And unfortunately, in some cultures, there is this scorekeeping culture. But ideally, you don't have that. And it's not about feeling embarrassed or less than. It's basically, again, owning everything. Just owning everything that happens. So you say, again, like I said, I screwed up. Here's why. Here's what I learned. And maybe now, if there are people that suffered because of your mistake, you apologize. I realize because of this mistake, you're going to have to come in for extra hours, right? Just make everything explicit instead of not saying things that people are already thinking and hoping you don't have to deal with that discomfort of dealing with it. When you say to someone who's now going to have to work extra hours because of your mistake, I apologize. I realize that this mistake is having an impact on you, and you take ownership of it. That person is really going to feel differently now about doing those hours of work than if you just pretended that wasn't the case.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, one of these things that kind of like you always have to try harder and harder to master. And I think we've tried a few things in our team as well, and it's kind of like a continuous effort. So if you, I don't know, create a fuck up channel on Slack, but you never post anything there, that's not going to bring you very far. So it really is an investment in that mindset and that culture, I think, that requires sustained effort as well.
Well, and I'll just add one thing, since people are interested about the SEALs are relentless about doing what they call after action reviews. And what they do is they strip away the hierarchy. So it's not the leader coming in and saying, all right, guys, tell me about your mistakes. They come in after a mission, so a project, and everybody breaks down what happened. And they talk about, here's how I contributed to this result. Here might be the mistakes that I made. And they just do it in a way that's it's painful, but they get so much learning out of it because of it.
It's super interesting because I think it relates a lot to the retrospectives idea, of course, and Agile, and probably many of you do them. And I think the interesting part is that it's always, I think that the SEALs idea to kind of bound them to a mission is really interesting, because often I think we plan retrospectives, they're in the calendar, and once you get to the point, you kind of start remembering, like, what are we retrospecting about? How did that go again? And I think actually being more organic about it and say, this is the mission, so this is the project, we completed it, that automatically triggers a retrospective, even if it's like a mini retro, instead of kind of, you know, going at it like by the book and kind of have the the slots and kind of doing retrospectives in order to like do a retrospective, I think is not as
Mm.
meaningful as the mini debriefs that you mentioned.
Something that might help with that is, and something, a new habit that I've recently adopted based on a conversation I had with a longtime technologist, is to start logging everything. And this can help with the distraction question also. When you're logging everything that's going on in your day and the decisions that you're making, now when it comes time to talk about a mistake, you can go back to your log and say, wait a minute, this is the rationale I had for making that decision. I didn't have this information back then that I know now. And so it's going to help you be much more objective about the mistakes you made, and maybe see that you made the best decision you could in that time.
In that moment of time. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, the learning from history part, which I think when you are in a very fast-paced environment is always the thing that you kind of tend to skip first, because you have no time to look back. You need to look forward. And then mistakes happen that you actually have done in the past already, or the blame.
That's the most painful. Yeah.
Does that answer your question though, Mario? Otherwise, please ask a follow-up question. We're happy to drill down on this a bit deeper. We do, cool, that's perfect. We do have one more from Anthony. Can you talk about why accountability seems to be such a catalyst for action, and also why accountability to others is so much easier than accountability to yourself? Good question. Thank you, Anthony.
Is that written somewhere? Let's see that.
No, I can copy. I think it is in the chat somewhere, but I'm going to copy paste that again. There you go.
So it comes down to trust. So if there's somebody who says they will do something, and sometimes they do it and sometimes they don't, it's really hard to trust that person. And so that's why accountability, somebody who think about somebody you know, who when they say they will do something, you know they will do it. They're not going to come back with some excuse or come back and do it late. When they say they're going to do something, they do it. And so that is the most valuable kind of person to have on your team, because now you can trust them. They might tell you when they can't do something. So that's why it's such a catalyst for action, because now that you know this person is going to be doing what they said they'll do, now you feel like, okay, I need to do what I said I will do. And so there's this beautiful symbiosis there where you're just feeding off this accountability energy. And you've probably had the opposite happen too, right? Where you're like, I don't know if that person's gonna, so maybe I'll get an extra day, because they'll probably be late too, right? And so now you have that downhill slide. So that's why accountability is just so important in building a company, because now you have this foundation of trust that everyone is going to be doing their best. They're going to be resourceful to do what they said they would do. And now you can make decisions based on that. You don't need to add a whole nother factor to your decision making, which is, are they going to do what they said they'll do? Or am I going to have to go back 3 times to ask them why they're not doing something? So it's the ultimate productivity hack, really.
Yeah.
If you're looking for productivity, to know that you can say something once and people will do it.
Maybe from like also a psychological perspective, it is really related to, it's somehow, the ego thing is really interesting, because on one hand, it's very easy to blame yourself, much easier than other people. Like other people don't blame you as much usually as you do yourself. And at the same time, though, it's much harder to fail in front of a person. So you also have this like additional kick of, if I promise this to Renita, I don't want Renita to think badly of me. Even if I'm stressed, I will still shoot her that email, because I really need to make sure she keeps me in mind as an accountable, reasonable, good person. And I want to kind of like stay that way. And I think when you have your own list and only you looked at it, it's kind of course, easier to talk to yourself in a way saying, like, you had a lot to do and you had a lot on your plate, and then this thing happened and you got distracted. And I think this is where the focus and the self-management and the hacks around really sticking to what you promised to yourself come in very handy, because if you're not really good with that, that will also impact your credibility and accountability towards others. and the other way around. So I think a hack that we have been recently trying actually in the team is to use each other as accountability partners and basically write each other the top 3 priors for every day, and then kind of like check back in the next morning or the evening and say like, I managed this, but I didn't manage this, because it's just so much, it's just so much more important to kind of like stay true to what you promise to the person that depends on you in a way.
Yes. That's a great practice to have an accountability partner. I think the ultimate in self-mastery is when you just make a promise to yourself and you keep it because you're important to yourself. So that's, I think, where we can all be moving towards, is just keeping promises to ourselves because we value ourselves without any external validation. So oftentimes we're relying on external validation for that kick of motivation. And, you know, if we're kind of internally saying, well, no one's going to know if I did this tomorrow or the next day.
Exactly.
But then you kind of go back to your own integrity. Is this the kind of person I want to be? Do I want to say to myself that I'm going to do something and then not do it? It's that simple, and it's that hard.
Yeah. Definitely really hard. Maybe just a last follow-up on this, and then I want to actually shed light on mental toughness and the resourcefulness that you mentioned, and kind of learn a little bit more from the Navy SEALs there. So for everyone who's listening, we're going to get into that interesting part of the conversation. But last but not least, if you are promising yourself and you have these 3 to-dos and something happened and you couldn't fulfill them for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. What is the best action, knowing the brain chemistry that we do have? So if it's not self-blame, what do we do instead?
Well, self-blame is never a good strategy.
Yeah.
So I think, again, you can look at that and say, all right, what was the setup here? How did I set myself up to not succeed? Because too often that's what we do, right? We underestimate how long it takes to get somewhere, how long it takes to do something. And then we're constantly underperforming our own expectations. So sometimes we just need to get realistic and say, you know what, I need to put in that cushion when I say I'm going to do something. It might be just that practical. And then at the same time, you know, take out the self-blame layer and just say, all right, and just really kind of get rational about it and say, all right, what are we going to do next time so that this doesn't happen? And there's no need to beat yourself up, self-flagellate. That's just an extra step that actually slows you down. It's like putting the brakes on while you're trying to hit the accelerator. So that takes practice also to stop doing that, because it's such a conditioned thing that we do. But just say, okay, let's skip that part. You know, like you fast forward to Netflix, maybe the intro. You can just ignore the intro and skip to the part where you're already coming up with a solution for next time.
So I'm definitely going to try what you, I think, also alluded to previously, where I think each day actually needs to end with this like mini retro, because there's days where you actually manage your tasks and it would be good to understand why. And then days where you don't, it would be also good to understand why. So I think that's also the very important part. I'm not sure, I think we all understand the value of doing this, but from my experience, I think more people don't do it than people actually do it. So I think just keeping in mind that the key to like managing the next 3 tasks is actually do like a good debrief at the end of the day, which you've taught me in the previous conversation. Haven't tried it yet, but it's definitely, I think, the next step I want to take as well.
Well, like planning, your brain isn't going to want to look back either. So there's definitely a distance to that.
Yeah, definitely. I have 3 more questions. Thank you so much, guys, for submissions and keeping this going. So no mental toughness conversation for now. Let's address Marius and Anthony's questions. We've talked about leadership and what we do as leaders, but how do you keep the team focused on the mission and delivering on it, whilst also retaining a sense of agency over the work being done? I'm gonna post it here.
So is the question about empowering them to do things in their own way, but still feel a sense of control?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's the eternal balancing act, isn't it? So I think start with that idea that you don't have to get it right off the bat. It's an experiment. You want to look at it as an experiment of different, so you're sort of calibrating what you do.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know anything about your team. Maybe you have a really young team that doesn't have a lot of experience, and so you do need to have be a little more hands-on. But it can
Mm-hmm.
start with communication. And so you set the context. I hired you because you're super smart, because you're resourceful, because I know you'll come up with solutions that I can't see. And I also want to make sure that we're all, heading in the same direction, on the same page. And so let's set up a schedule for me to check in and to make sure that I've been clear in communicating what is important. So you're taking responsibility for being clear, and instead of I got to make sure that you're doing it right, you're doing what I told you to do, you're saying I want to make sure that I was clear.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, now you're making it safe for them to say, hey, I actually am not clear about something you said, or I'm not sure about the priority. Can we really hammer this out?
Mm-hmm. I think actually this follow-up question that Jan just posed is also super interesting. I'm gonna plug that up front just because it relates a little bit. I didn't forget about the other two questions, so stay tuned. Definitely gonna answer those two. How do you help someone, because this is about agency and I think intentionalism, how do you help someone who constantly puts what others, colleagues or leader, his directs, think as one of the highest priorities? Super relevant, thank you, Yat. Admittedly happens to me too often and doesn't necessarily help the team, and I catch myself, but like it definitely is a trap that it's just so easy to fall into like servant behaviors, which are great on the one hand, but if they conflict your intentions, I think it's going to be very tricky to actually reach the goals.
So how do you help someone who puts what others think? Oh, so making others' priorities your priorities.
Exactly. They just pull on you constantly and you just go with them because you need to help people, right? Like that's your job as a leader or as a team member.
Well, that's why being a leader is so hard, right? So again, this is another balancing act. And I think sort of the general, maybe not very satisfying answer to a lot of these questions is we need to create context. Because too often we have an assumption of how things should go. Things start to go, and then we say, oh, no, that's not what I thought was going to happen. And now we're reacting to people's behaviors, trying to change things after the fact. Whereas if we set the context first, get people to agree, be clear on the context. So in this case, let me just think for a second. You want to be able to say, as a company, as a team, these are our priorities. So this week, I'm focused on this. I can help you with this part of your priority, but you need to get very clear on the best way for me to do that so that I'm not just coming in and wasting a lot of time doing something that you haven't thought through. So basically, you want to train your team to think through things further along the line before they come to you, because everybody's kind of reacting, and so they're coming to you to help them with their urgent thing.
Exactly.
Instead of thinking through, all right, this is the best way I could actually use Darya's time. And
yes, I mean that's probably one part of Jan's question, but I think the other part is also that oftentimes when there is so many moving pieces, which I think in the startup and kind of innovation context per se, but also I think in a lot of different industries is the case right now. So many things change constantly, and I think when people get a bit disoriented and I know this one thing is important, this other project we're working on, but there's this new project now and it seems like my leader cares about it, so like I probably need to bring it up, and then they bring it up, and I think these situations are very kind of tricky because basically you are as a leader being asked to deprioritize or prioritize on the spot. So I think one key moment that you have mentioned, Renita, in the beginning is like, if you have it on the stickies in front of you, it's going to be easier for your brain to remind yourself, today, these three things matter, or this week for the team, these three things matter. But I think what happens often, at least in our context, and I don't know whether, Jan, this is yours as well, is that there's just 17 things going on. Three things are still most important, of course. but the 17 things just like plop up throughout the day, throughout the week. And maybe the question is, what to tell to this person that's struggling with this kind of like switching priorities constantly, how to enable them, like what sentences can they say, what statements and intentions can they express to help everyone who is around them and kind of pulling on them understand that they're just focused on their priorities. So like how to actually do the management part.
That's very common. So I had a client who had exactly that issue. She had a team member that was working on a very critical, time-sensitive project, and yet she was getting calls for help with other projects. And so you as a leader need to go in and say, this project, A, is your absolute #1 priority. Here's what I recommend, is you spend 2 hours every day working on this priority. And then take 30 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever, you just kind of give them some guidelines so that they know this is how much, again, using time as a tool to manage their attention so that they understand, all right, it doesn't mean that I just work on that #1 priority. I still need to do these other things. And then the third piece was, so spend 45 minutes working on those other projects and then keep me posted on what's still not happening, right? So there's this line of communication, but now the person knows from 10 to 12, I'm working on priority #1. And then I have 45 minutes that I can just focus on these other things.
And it's so good to hear, because I think a lot of times, and I used to think this in kind of like in my first 2 to 3 years, is it almost feels like you're prescriptive or declarative. And it almost feels like, oh, I'm like micromanaging people. How am I telling them how to distribute their time? I think it's very common to have this thought, specifically if you have imposter syndrome and you're like, I don't even know how much time they're supposed to be. I don't know how fast they are. So I think it's actually really good to hear, and this was also my experience, that not shying away, but being very concrete and specific in the guidelines, you actually are supporting people, particularly if they're very mind-boggled with 17 tasks, or if they're junior, or both. They actually need you to support them doing that for them until they actually get traction again and they kind of like can do this better on their own again. And I think this is the kind of hidden truth almost. So like a secret I wish I would have known earlier is that it's really not about prescribing or declaring this is the only way how you can do it. But if you see someone struggle, that is a very important piece of support that you can give.
Right, if somebody's struggling, that's why you're doing this, right? Because somebody is overwhelmed and they're not able to make decisions on their own.
Yeah, exactly.
If somebody has it under control, you don't necessarily have to do this.
Yes. We have 3 more questions. We can do this. We have about like 5-7 minutes. Thank you again, everyone who's been submitting questions and submitting very thoughtful questions. All right. We have one from Michael, and then one from Anthony, and another one from Bill. So Michael wants to know, do you have some personal favorite thinking tools that you recommend to your clients?
Can you clarify thinking tools?
Good question. I assume it's something like mental models, but it would be good if you could clarify, Michael. Like the thinking hats.
You know what? I'm not sure what the thinking hats frameworks. I mean, I have my own methodology, which I call the mental 6-pack, which is 3 steps, which is mastering your biology, burning the mental fat, and then flexing your mental muscles. So it really starts with your biology, mastering your survival reactions, and then burning that mental fat, the second guessing, the doubt, just all the redundant thinking, the anxiety. And then you can start to flex the mental muscles of curiosity, empathy, vulnerability. Nobody's going to be vulnerable when they're in survival mode, right? And that's what 99% of people are most of the time. So yeah, we need to take care of sort of the foundational things first. And then within that, I have lots of tools that I share.
Awesome. This is really good. I was just writing it down. For everyone, by the way, before I forget to say this, for everyone who actually has the AI leadership coach on their phones already, I know some of you actually are one of our early adopters and are using it, you can actually hear a kind of an excerpt, a mini podcast with Renita in the app. So if you go into the explore section, you can actually check that out. There is also a new podcast episode out with Renita where she goes a little bit deeper into the different tools and hacks. So definitely check this out. Making sure that we go deep enough seems like a good way to make friends with your nervous system. Absolutely. I really also dig this framework. I think we need to think about how to bring this and make this into tips for our users. Super valuable. Thank you for sharing this. Anthony wants to know, and then I will take the Bill, the last question from Bill. After meeting regularly with executives, how do you ensure they keep up the same inward reflection that you provide when your time together ends? And are you the one making that sure?
So ideally, people learn, they adopt the habits, executives adopt the habits, and it just becomes so ingrained. Now they've changed their automatic default. So, I do have clients that now can notice more quickly when they're falling back into old habits. And so they now have tools, the tools that I've given them to actually use to manage themselves, to manage their thinking. But it is hard, right? That default setting is so strong and powerful. Sometimes a few months of coaching can't change everything. But I do think the idea is just really raising awareness so that they at least can see what they're doing. And then use the tools to really start to manage themselves.
Interesting. And I think last but not least, it's also my favorite question. And I think you have many interesting answers to that because we've talked about this briefly in the past, is from Bill. I'm hearing the term Zoom fatigue. That is the new form of group meeting, is one of the video calls, and it's getting tiring. Is there a solution, or do we just need to deal? And I think it's probably both. What kind of solutions to deal with it do you use, and do you also recommend and see?
Yeah, it's an interesting problem, isn't it? I think, again, this is really going to come down to managing yourself and creating habits that will get you away from the screen. You need to just step away from the screen and find a way to do that. Because again, your mind or your brain is just going to want to keep doing the same thing. Let's just sit here for another call. Oh, let's just sit here for another call. We don't need to stand up. So I can't, I have this Apple Watch that's constantly reminding me to stand up. But I'm like, no, I can't stand up right now. I'm doing something. So I think just understanding that natural human nature, and then creating some rules for yourself, whatever that works. I talked about this on the podcast, but ideally you want to be finding physical things that you can do in between calls, whether it's standing up to stretch, doing some yoga moves, whether it's doing some push-ups, or sometimes I wash the dishes, anything to get myself back in my body and back in the present moment. Because with Zoom, it's so easy to, you're literally up in your head the whole time. You're in your head and you're looking at other people's talking heads. So it's going to be a new level of self-management, I think, going forward. The degree now that we're on technology. And so you need to find ways to set yourself up for success, basically. Start noticing what you're not doing. Start noticing that you think you want to do something and you're not doing it, and then experiment. What can I change around this to help me change this habit? So that's where I would start.
Makes perfect sense. I think we've covered so much interesting ground. I also always feel when we talk, Renita, that there is much more ground to cover. So I just can encourage everyone who is on the call to follow Renita on Twitter and on Instagram, also to connect with her on LinkedIn, since you've all got the LinkedIn invites. We will be following up with a recording of the talk, of course, and we'll also be unpacking the nuggets that we've covered throughout the next couple of days on our social media. So watch out for this. Also, those that do have the coach, please look out for Renita's tips and the podcast that we have in the app, so you can actually apply and play around with the very actionable tips that she's giving also in that podcast. And last but not least, we will be following up with you with a link to the beta of the code. So if you haven't gotten it yet, it's in iOS only currently. Do check it out and yeah, learn more from experts and also other leaders like Renita. And see you next time. Super exciting. Thank you so much, Renita, for your valuable time and your insights.
Thank you, Daria, and thank you everyone for your excellent questions.
Yes, indeed. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you guys. It's been really a huge pleasure and very insightful.